The action happened overnight. Former President Donald Trump published a series of posts on his social media platform, Truth Social. Dozens of them, some after midnight, some in the early morning hours. The target was not Democrats. The target was his own party. He accused Republican senators of weakness. He warned them against compromise. He urged confrontation over Senate rules, including the filibuster. Those are the facts of timing and content. They are not disputed. Why this matters now is simple. Congress is in the middle of a procedural standoff. A government shutdown is again a live possibility. Deadlines are approaching, votes are not there. And into that moment, the former president intervened publicly, not through private negotiation, not through party leadership, through public pressure. That choice is the first fact that has to be placed on the table. The second is what he was asking for. In those posts, he suggested Republicans should be willing to end or bypass the filibuster to advance his agenda. That is not interpretation. That is the substance of what he wrote. The filibuster is a Senate rule requiring 60 votes to advance most legislation. For decades, Republicans have defended it as a safeguard against majoritarian power. They have framed it as essential to institutional balance. Mr. Trump's posts cut directly against that position. That is the contradiction. The same party that has argued the filibuster protects minority rights is now being urged by its most dominant figure to discard it when it becomes an obstacle. That is not a theoretical conflict. It is a recorded one. Earlier today, several Republican senators declined to respond directly to the posts. Others said legislative authority rests with Congress. Those statements were careful. They were non-committal. No one disputed the authenticity of the posts. No one disputed the message. That silence matters. At the same time, Democrats pointed to the episode as evidence of internal Republican division. They accused the party of paralysis. They argued that procedural delay is being used while responsibility is shifted elsewhere. That claim exists, but it is not yet a verdict. To assess what is happening, the record has to widen, because this is not the first time concerns like these have been raised. Former President Barack Obama made remarks that are now circulating again. They were not made this week. They were made earlier. In those remarks, he warned about lawmakers surrendering their role as a co-equal branch of government. He said he was worried about how quickly democratic norms were being weakened. He said members of Congress had been reluctant to challenge executive power even when they believed it was being abused. Those were his words. At the time, those comments were debated. Today, they are being replayed in a different context. The relevance is not partisan. It is institutional. A former president is publicly pressuring legislators to change long-defended rules in the middle of a high-stakes budget fight. That is the factual alignment. The shutdown dispute itself adds another layer. Funding for nutrition assistance programs is involved. Healthcare funding is involved. Democrats argue Republicans are using procedure as cover while placing the burden on low-income Americans. Republicans reject that claim. They argue spending restraint is necessary. Both sides state positions. The record does not yet settle that dispute. What can be settled is this. Mr. Trump's posts did not clarify a path forward. They did not outline legislation. They did not propose compromise. They applied pressure. They named internal enemies. They framed disagreement as disloyalty. That is the action. The factual baseline is clear. The contradiction is documented. The institutional stakes are visible. Whether this is strategy or escalation is not a question to answer yet. But the record does not stop with a single night of posts. And it does not end with silence from lawmakers. The record does not stop there. The claim implicit in those posts is that Republican senators are blocking progress out of weakness, that procedural rules are the obstacle, and that forceful confrontation would resolve the standoff, but that claim collapses when placed against the record. The Senate rules Mr. Trump criticized were not imposed by Democrats in this moment. They are rules Republicans have defended repeatedly in public over many years, including during periods when they held power and benefited from those same constraints. When Republicans controlled the Senate, the filibuster was described by party leaders as a firewall against rapid policy swings, a protection against executive overreach, and a stabilizing force. Those statements are on record. What has changed is not the rule, but whose priorities are being slowed by it. Mr. Trump's posts also omit a critical fact. Senate Republicans do not currently possess the votes to pass major legislation, even if the filibuster were weakened. Internal divisions exist over spending levels, social policy, and shutdown tactics. Ending or bypassing the rule does not resolve those disagreements. That omission matters because it reframes a math problem as a loyalty test. The record also shows who enabled that reframing. Party leadership did not publicly correct it. Senators who disagreed did so obliquely or not at all. Silence in this context functioned as accommodation. The consequence is measurable. Negotiations stalled further as public pressure replaced private bargaining. Deadlines drew closer without movement. Markets reacted with caution. Federal agencies prepared contingency plans. Those are not abstract outcomes. They are operational responses to legislative uncertainty. The posts also revived selective memory about Democratic positions on the filibuster. Mr. Trump criticized former Democratic senators who once defended the rule, implying hypocrisy. What the record shows is that both parties have shifted positions depending on circumstance. That is not new. What is new is the explicit demand that one party abandon its stated institutional principles immediately, mid-crisis, under threat of political retaliation. That escalation is the hinge point. It converts a procedural debate into a test of obedience. Meanwhile, Democrats seized on the moment to argue that Republicans are incapable of governing. That argument gains traction not because of rhetoric, but because no alternative plan has been articulated. No vote count has been produced. No timetable has been offered. The White House declined to comment, which is consistent with the fact that these posts came from a former president, not the sitting administration. But the absence of comment does not erase the effect. The pressure campaign altered the negotiating environment without producing clarity. That is the factual outcome. When a claim promises resolution but delivers paralysis, it does not survive the record. And when party actors allow that claim to stand unchallenged, responsibility spreads beyond the person who posted it. The pattern becomes clearer from here. What follows is repetition, not deviation. And the record makes that plain. This is not the first time public pressure has been used to override internal process. It is a familiar sequence, a public demand, a narrowing of acceptable dissent, and an insistence that resistance equals betrayal. The difference now is timing. This intervention arrives during a shutdown threat with defined victims and deadlines. Federal workers face furloughs. Assistance programs face disruption. Healthcare coverage faces uncertainty. Those outcomes are not speculative. They are triggered automatically when funding lapses. And yet the pressure campaign focuses not on resolving those risks, but on reassigning blame before resolution exists. That is escalation by displacement. The comparison to prior conduct matters here. In earlier budget standoffs, similar rhetoric was used to harden positions, not bridge them. The result then was prolonged shutdown, economic drag, and eventual retreat without substantive gains. That history is documented. The beneficiaries were narrow, media attention was captured, loyalty was tested, institutional trust eroded, the victims were diffuse, workers missed paychecks, agencies halted services, public confidence declined. The same structure is visible now. The posts elevate confrontation as virtue while leaving the mechanics untouched. No bill text is offered. No concession is identified. No end state is defined. That absence is not neutral. It shifts costs outward. It forces institutions to absorb uncertainty while individuals bear consequence. That is how pressure becomes policy without accountability. The institutional implications are direct. When legislative actors are told publicly that rules are optional if inconvenient, the signal travels beyond the immediate dispute. It tells future actors that norms are conditional. It teaches that process matters only when aligned with outcome. That is not a partisan observation. It is an institutional one. And it explains why earlier warnings about weakened norms are resurfacing now. Not because they predict intent, but because they describe effect. Meanwhile, Republican senators are placed in a narrowed corridor. Open defiance risks political reprisal. Compliance risks abandonment of previously stated principles. Silence delays reckoning, but does not avoid it. That is the bind. Democrats exploit it rhetorically, but they did not create it. The record shows the pressure originates internally. The broader system absorbs the shock. States brace for federal disruption. Households wait. None of that advances negotiation. It merely raises the stakes of failure. When escalation repeats without producing movement, pattern replaces accident. And when pattern persists across crises, responsibility no longer rests solely with the instigator. It extends to those who normalize it. The public argument being made is about strength. The operational result is fragility. Institutions become brittle when rules are treated as disposable. Negotiations become performative when outcomes are undefined. Governance becomes episodic when crisis is the chosen lever. That is the cumulative effect now visible. It is not inferred from motive. It is observed in consequence. And it leads to a final question that cannot be avoided. Whether this approach is defended as necessary because it works, or tolerated because challenging it carries cost. There is one final element that has to be addressed. The strongest defense offered for this behavior is that extraordinary circumstances require extraordinary pressure, that entrenched institutions move only when forced, and that public confrontation is the only language Washington understands. That defense sounds pragmatic until it is tested against the record. The record shows that the pressure applied here did not unlock votes, did not clarify policy, and did not shorten the crisis. It intensified uncertainty without producing resolution. It also rests on a false premise that obstruction is procedural rather than substantive. The evidence shows otherwise. The impasse exists because lawmakers disagree on spending priorities, shutdown tactics, and political risk tolerance. No change in Senate rules resolves that. The defense also argues that the former president is merely expressing opinion, not exercising power. That claim ignores documented influence. When a dominant political figure directs public threats inward, the effect is coercive even without formal authority. That is not speculation. It is observable in behavior. Evasive responses, delayed negotiations, narrowed debate. The defense further suggests that long-term norms are secondary to short-term wins. That argument fails because no win has been defined, let alone achieved. What exists instead is cost without payoff. Federal workers face disruption. Program recipients face uncertainty. Markets factor in instability. Those harms are real and traceable. Responsibility, therefore, has to be assigned with precision. The posts are the initiating action. The failure to correct their factual omissions allowed misrepresentation to stand. Leadership that chose silence over clarity bears responsibility for enabling confusion. Lawmakers who privately reject the premise but publicly avoid confronting it contribute to normalization. This is not collective guilt. It is distributed accountability based on role and choice. The final judgment is not about intent. It is about effect. The effect is a negotiation environment distorted by public coercion, an institutional debate reduced to loyalty signaling, and a crisis prolonged rather than resolved. That outcome is incompatible with claims of strength or effectiveness. It reflects fragility masked as force. The record does not support the defense that this approach is necessary. It supports the conclusion that it is corrosive. And the gravity lies here. When political actors repeatedly choose escalation over resolution, and when institutions absorb that choice without correction, crisis becomes routine. Governance becomes episodic. Responsibility blurs. That is how accountability erodes, not in a single act, but through tolerated repetition. There is no optimistic note to end on because the facts do not justify one. The record closes with consequence, not reassurance.